Before I get into introducing myself, I wanted to start with a little bit of a story. So this is a story about Christian. This is Christian here. He's a designer. Now, Christian, also, I just have to say, when I present online, I use Google Slides, and when I present in person, I use Keynote. So I went a bit overboard with the animations. Sorry, but I had fun. So this is Christian. He works on Team A. It's fine, everything's good. But he's one of the only designers in his organisation. So Team B comes along and they have a gap. They need a designer. So Christian's maybe got a little bit of time. So we'll split him in two. And then he'll join Team B as well as Team A. And that's, it's kind of working. It's just about working. It's just about keeping on top of it. What happens then? Team C comes along. And what's Team C need that they're missing? A designer. There aren't enough designers. So what we'll do is we'll split Christian in two. And Christian will join Team C as well. And that's okay because, Christian will spend a third of his time on Team A and a third of his time on Team B and a third of his time on Team C. And that makes 100%, right? Nope. So one of the best keynote transitions, naffest keynote transitions. Okay, so has anyone seen this situation before? Has anyone been the person at the end of this situation, Christian? A few hand ups. It's like most of you are inflicting it on the few people that just put their hand up just there. So even if you take into account that you have stand-ups and retrospectives and all the kind of team habits and team meetings that you need to go in and duplicate, there's a lot of context switching, as Rich was talking about earlier, that needs to happen as you're moving between these teams. And what tends to happen, and I've seen, seems to be often designers in this position where they feel very frustrated, feel overworked, they feel annoyed, nobody gets their best time, they don't get their best time for thinking, and products suffer, really, or our work suffers. So I've seen this a few times, and what I wanted to do was explore a little bit about maybe why this is happening, what else is happening, and what we might be able to do to make things better. Not just for Christian, but for the things that we're creating as well. So my name is Emily. Hello. I am an agile delivery organisational consultant. I work with a lot of different organisations on various things. Some of you may know me from my work with communities of practice, but I'm always trying to help create the environment where people can thrive so that organisations can thrive. I have come, this is where I insult you all, sorry. I've come from New Brighton. Anyone know New Brighton? It's like the old Brighton, but better. So we don't have a pier anymore, and we don't have much in the way of attractions. But what we do have is a sandy beach. So New Brighton, actually weirdly in the hotel that we're staying in, I went past the picture and I was like, hold on a minute, that's a picture of the New Brighton Lighthouse in the Brighton station. I was like, has somebody just gone, oh, that's Brighton, taken the pictures and put them up on the wall. So it's on the Wirral Peninsula up near Liverpool. So I've come a few hundred miles. It's my new home. It's New Brighton. So I'm going to talk today about why can't we just get along. So I've noticed this increasing trend, which worries me. It's kind of it's an industry of specialization at the expense of things like collaboration, shared responsibility, and really focusing on outcomes. And there might be many reasons why this is. It could be to do with organisational structures, changing workforces, uncertainty. And this trend is creating silos. It creates silos across departments, between roles, and even in teams, which means we lose some of the value that we get from multidisciplinary teams. So I'm going to explore this trend, why it worries me, some of the reasons behind it, and maybe some approaches that might help. Okay, so the trend that I've seen. I hear a lot of we hear a lot of this kind of thing. So, is your organisation data-led or product-led or engineering-led, delivery-led, design-led, policy-led, citizen-led, or hippo-led? Probably lots of organisations. Highest person opinion. Do these chime with some of you? Some of you like we're something-led. And the challenge with this, it can, not necessarily always, but there are some anti-patterns that happen, which means it can dictate who holds the power in the organisation and who holds the decision-making power. So I wanted to look at a few of these, and I thought, okay, what are people that are in these types of organisations saying? So I have a few examples. So the first one here, this is an engineering-led organisation, and it's a blog post called Why Engineers Should Seek Out Engineering-Led Companies and How to Find Them. So this is obviously a very grumpy engineer that wrote this blog post, who says that places where engineers aren't in charge, it feels like they're just blindly applying bog standard operating procedures of the industry, working agile, doing sprints, etc. So obviously, you want, if you are an engineer, you want an environment that appreciates engineering. I've also seen very engineering-led organisations where they deliver at all costs. So build, put things out there. Building is everything. And the challenge there is, the anti-pattern there is, you can break things. If you move fast and break things, you can break your users, you can break your people. It's kind of very one-sided. So there is a danger of just being engineering-led. All right, so what about data-led? So there's a white paper I read on data-led companies, and it says, objectivity of data-driven approach means it can lead to insights that drive success without any restricting factors or preconceptions. Robust and reliable rather than personal opinion and convenient. So data-led is the best way to do things. Now, the anti-pattern there is if you just look at data, you're not necessarily getting the story behind the data. So one example is when the passport renewal service was being built, one thing that they saw was that people were going halfway through the passport renewal and then dropping off at one point. So the data said, this service doesn't work, people are dropping off. Actually, when they went to speak to users to kind of look at why is that happening, it was because people just wanted to know how much it cost, and you didn't get to the price until halfway through the process. So the data doesn't really tell us why things are happening, it just tells us that things are happening. So product-led organisations, I feel like it's ducking slightly here, I think there's a lot of product people around. Product-led organisations make their products the vehicle for acquiring and retaining customers, driving growth, influencing organisational priorities, but they represent the future of business in a digital-first world. Again, it's great, and what's not intended is some of the anti-patterns I've seen where organisations are creating little mini organisations inside them with product managers at the top holding all the decision-making power and pitted against other teams. So it makes it very difficult for things like information and people and knowledge to flow across those individual silos. The problem is, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you are only taking, one approach, everything is through an engineering lens, or everything is through a data lens, or everything is through a product lens, that is the approach that you're going to take when you look at a problem. So this, I'm talking about anti-patterns. It's not what is necessarily intended, but I have seen problems in places. So why is this a problem? So one group hold the power, and it's a kind of given power, a legal positional power. And what that also means is that those that aren't given the option to contribute are left behind. So people like Christian, in the example at the beginning, he's got no time. He can't be at all the meetings. He hasn't got the time to think. He hasn't got the time to contribute. So those disciplines and those specialisms and those different ways of looking at the world tend to get left behind because they're being pulled in all those directions. And they are overworked. So, the example of a third of your time on one project, a third of your time on another project, and a third of your time on another project, which you might think looks like this, actually looks more like this. There's, if you're just working on two things, there's like 17% of effort spent on context switching. And I'll show you a graph. This is from some research on a paper called I can't read that on my screen, Impact of Task Switching and Work Interruptions on Software Development Process. Handy report if you want to show some of your stakeholders there. That shows there that the number of projects that people are working on will increase the amount of time that people spend context switching. So if you are, according to this, if you're working 2.5 projects, that could be up to 7 hours of context switching. So that's almost an entire day of just kind of ramping down from one project, ramping up to another project. That's an entire day. So that, that's when someone like Christian in the earlier example, if you've got a third of your time, and then an extra day to find, no wonder people are looking very stressed and overworked and not feeling like they have the opportunity to contribute properly. So it also doesn't equip teams to solve wicked problems. So wicked problems are what a lot of us deal with when we're building software and we're building products, is problems that are difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. So there is no one solution to the things that we build. There's different ways of trying things out, and things change, people change, environments change, situations change. So there isn't just one single solution. There are many ways of tackling that. And understanding the problem space, trying out solutions from lots of different viewpoints is important. So, excuse me, can anyone tell me what these are? Silos. Quick hands up. Who has silos in their organisation? And so the people that don't have their hands up, you work on your own. Is that right? So we see silos in organisations. We also seen silos in teams. Does anyone have silos in their own teams? Yeah, some hands up. So we can look like a multidisciplinary team, but yet work is actually going from one person to the next person to the next person. And those dependencies that Rich was talking about earlier can exist on that team level. So things that are blocking people on a team level. And what can also end up happening if you're very kind of specific about this role does this role does this role does this, is you end up with massive teams because you have to have every single role, every single job title on that team doing those roles. And what's really important about multidisciplinary teams, I'll talk about healthcare a couple of times. If you look at healthcare, if you're in hospital or if you've got a health problem, you have a multidisciplinary team that looks after you. And the reason you have that is because you have people from different specialisms trying to help you not die, basically. You don't necessarily want one person that's going to get like, this is the problem, and kind of really stick in that one way of thinking about the world. You want people to take care of you a lot more holistically and take different viewpoints to understanding the complex nature that is our bodies. So this guy, David Epstein, he has a book called Range, which I'd recommend reading. It's called Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialist World. He says, in a wicked world, relying upon experience from a single domain is not only limiting, it can be disastrous. So he's all about how we shouldn't specialise as individuals too early, because we need like a broad range of ideas and approaches and ways of seeing the world so we can solve problems. Different domains, experiences and view of the world bring diversity to solutions, making them more rounded. So instead of, we only have a hammer, everything is a nail, we have these different ways, different approaches and different ways of seeing the world to deal with problems. So I wanted to find a way of find a way of explaining this and why this is so important. So has anyone come across this website, Draw Toast, before? A few people. Good, right? So this guy, Tom Wojcik, has a way of helping people come together and collaborate on solutions that have kind of a unified view of the world. And he starts, there's a workshop, I think you can just download his workshop from his website at Draw Toast, and he gets people to draw how they make toast. And when I went to the website, I saw these 4 different ideas of how you make toast. And I thought they were really interesting because they really show 4 different ways that you might approach a problem. Something really simple that you think, oh, no, you just make toast. But actually, there's lots of different ways of thinking about it. So in the first one, in number 1, it seems fairly procedural, right? There's a loaf of bread, which turns into a slice of bread that you put in a toaster. It's even got steps in it. You put it in the toaster, you turn the toaster on, and then you do the timer, odd way around. Then you butter the toast, and then you eat the toast. It's very procedural. This is how you make toast. And then you look at number 2, and number 2 steps back and says, okay, where does the toast exist in this system of toast making? And we step right back to growing wheat, to grinding it to flour, that's how it works, right? To baking bread that turns into bread. And the toast, the actual making of the toast, it happens very quickly. And then the toast is at the end and you've got toast. Number 3, I think it's really fascinating because in number 3, there's only one step here of making toast. But for this person, the way they make toast is they make it in a frying pan, which is how toast happens. Some people in some countries make toast that way, or maybe it's their family culture that makes it that way. When I was growing up, I made toast on an eye-level grill. Anyone grow up in the 80s? Yeah, so I didn't have a toaster. Do you have a toaster? Now it's like a revelation. So quick. So there's a whole different associations that come with making toast when there's a frying pan involved rather than a toaster. So actually you've got a whole different view of the world. The person up here might never consider, if you were trying to solve how do you help people make toast, up here they may never consider that you need to get access to a frying pan, and down here they might. So bringing in those different viewpoints is so important. And then this one, which I love, number 4, which is all about the user. This person is got their toast, making it, they're smiling the whole way through. They're really enjoying this toast making experience. They're smiling the whole way through, and at the end, they're so happy they've got their toast. So there's 4 different ways of looking at the world just on something very simple as making toast. Very procedural, kind of one that's a bit more looking at the system, one that has a completely different kind of cultural associations of how they make toast, and one that's very much about the user. So I just thought it was a really great way of saying, oh, look, you can really see why these diverse points of view coming together help solve a problem in a much more rounded way than you can if you're just one person or one discipline trying to do it. So what Tom Wojcik says, he has a TED talk called Got a Wicked Problem, First Tell Me How You Make Toast. He says when people work together under the right circumstances, group models are much better than individual models. And he talks about, doing this with teams or doing this with people to come up with solutions, and what emerges as a unifying system model that integrates the diversity of everyone's individual points of view. So check that out. And then don't tell me how you make toast. All right. So I've talked about some of the worrying trend that I'm seeing. I've talked about how, some of the behaviours. I've talked about context switching and wicked problems and the need for diverse experiences. I want to talk a bit about why I think it's happening, and this is just musing, really. These are some things that I've been kind of looking at and looking for, to see if there's any research out there that backs it up. So I think it's to do with a few things. The first thing is how we think about ourselves and our professional identity and our sense of self in the workplace. Also, what our culture is in our organisations and what kind of behaviour is rewarded and how this fits with power structures and with decision making. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was this, professional protectism. Now, this is a term, has anyone heard this term before? So this is like, go and like raid healthcare, like writing. There's some really interesting stuff in there. And I was reading this paper and it talked about professional protectism in healthcare. And I was like, oh, I've seen that. I've seen that in teams. I've seen that in organisations making software. So this is where people protect their professional boundaries. They're like, this is my domain. That's your domain. Has anyone seen this? So it's seeing lots of nods. So I feel like it's a slight therapy session. So this paper here, which is really great, it's called Developing Professional Identity in Multi-Professional Teams. It talks about professional protectism and says the introduction of new roles or ways of working can be perceived as a challenge or threat to pre-existing professional identities. So they talk about this idea that if a doctor tends to carry out an endoscopy as a core part of their professional role, then ceding this task to another professional group may be seen as resulting in loss of status, authority, responsibility, or experience. So people don't want to give up what's seen as their job to anyone else because it feels like it diminishes them in some way in the professional environment. I read that. I was like, yeah, that is totally what I see going on. And that kind of leads to a sense of self as well. So a sense of our status, authority, and experience. So this happens, and we have this idea, we get these multidisciplinary teams, we put everyone together and everyone works together really lovely. And if you actually, what you've got going on is people protecting their professional identity within those teams, and you're not having the conversations and exploring that and raising that, then it's just going to continue to be a problem and you'll just get these in-team silos. And that can cause a lot of friction. Added to that, with all the lockdowns that we've been through, with hybrid ways of working, that kind of adds to our need to protect our sense of self and really understand, where do we fit? Where do we fit in our teams and where do we fit in our organisations? So isolation tested our sense of identity because it limited our access to in-person social feedback. And that kind of continues because we're in this hybrid world. So how do you maintain your status and your sense of self in the workplace when you don't really see anyone that much? And then I think the third factor that adds to this is incentives and rewards. So what is being rewarded in your workplace? So you see this when organisations say, oh, we don't want everyone working weekends, but that team that works weekends and gets something shipped then gets celebrated for doing that. And it's like, we don't want that, but we're also going to celebrate you for doing that. So if people are incentivised, so an example, I've seen teams kind of pitted against each other. So, and that's like whoever kind of comes out on top and wins first gets incentivised. Those kind of behaviours will continue because leadership is saying, this is what we want. We want you to behave like this, or we want to kind of raise you up for the work that you do in this very specific area. I've also things like, that's one I've definitely seen, kind of product managers getting bonuses based on if their team finishes something first. So, has anyone seen that? Has anyone seen product managers get paid bonuses for getting stuff shipped? Yeah, a few. No, good. All right, so what are some things that we might be able to do about this? So as an organisation, I think one thing that's really important is creating the environment where the edges around what people are doing, the kind of blur and the move towards a bit more collaboration is encouraged. And multidisciplinary is recognised as good. So one thing I like to talk about is the fact that disciplines are not the same as roles. So let me describe what I mean by that. So instead of saying test engineering, for example, is a discipline. Product management is a discipline. User research is a discipline. So it's a specialist area. It is not necessarily the same as a test engineer, a user researcher, and a product manager. If you're saying that these roles and disciplines are super tightly coupled, then there is no overlap around the edges. And that can become problematic. Overlapping those roles are great. And actually, you tend to find people do overlap in the types of things that they do. And I'll go through how you might do that in a second. Also recognizing and celebrating that people have broken comb-shaped skills and capabilities. Now, this term I feel slightly awkward because it's got the word broken in it. It's not, it's a bit weird. Have people heard of T-shaped people? Okay, have you heard of pie-shaped people, as in the symbol, not like the thing you eat? Maybe post-COVID, everyone felt a bit pie-shaped. So have you heard of broken comb-shaped? I think it was introduced by Jared Spall. And it's pretty much more like what we are like as people. So you have some deep specialisms, and it's not necessarily a deep specialism in a whole discipline. You have deep specialisms in different areas, and you have less deep specialisms in other areas, and you have awareness as well of other areas. So it's really great if a whole team has awareness of what everyone else does on that team and the value they bring to that team. I was thinking about this. So I for myself, I was a delivery manager for a while. I'm a consultant now. I went to art college for 6 years. I have a master's in fine art, which is something I don't use all the time. I do some design. I do content writing. I wrote a book. I've sometimes done some product management. I can make a website. Like these, not to deep specialism, but I have this kind of mixed bag of things, which means if I join a team, I can bring everything of that to a team. And everyone in a team brings all their wonderful special skills that they have at the different levels that they have. And if you make it easier for people to play to their strengths, even if it isn't in their job description, well, first of all, they're going to be happier. And secondly, it's going to be of more benefit. It's more beneficial to the team, and you have those wonderful crossovers. What I like to do when you're thinking about putting a new team together is to actually talk about the people and the skills that they have and how they complement each other, and kind of mix that up with what does the team actually need. And then you can create a really kind of fantastic rounded team without saying, we need a product manager, we need a delivery manager, we need this, we need this, we need this, and this kind of shopping list of roles, which is not the same. So thinking about teams kind of balancing their knowledge, skills and experience. One thing I did a little while ago, which I have a blog post on my blog here, which is at emilyweber.co.uk, is really take this approach into building a progression framework. So I worked with Citizens Advice to actually build a modular-based progression framework that looked at disciplines and then built roles out of those disciplines. So for them, their delivery manager role, for example, we said, well, they're probably, if they're a senior delivery manager, they're probably expert in all the capabilities we need of a delivery manager. But they are, for this particular organisation, maybe a novice in content design and somewhere between novice and competent in data analysis. What we were able to do there, and that they actually really importantly had awareness of every other discipline that was important in their team. What we could do there was build a progression framework that talked about roles in the context of all the other roles. What happened then is that people could say, well, actually, if I want to shift, I know how far away I am from that other role because I can read those capabilities across roles rather than having them super separate. Like there's this job description over here and this job description over here, and they overlap, but we're not going to really talk about it and we're going to write them differently. What that really helped them do is bring them to get more together as an organisation and help them have this idea that if you're an expert, you can lead in an area and other people can take on some of the responsibilities of those disciplines without you losing your professional status, which was great. But if you want to talk to me more about that later, I will. And for teams, this is another really fascinating concept that I read from healthcare. So healthcare talk a lot about multidisciplinary teams, which is where members have separate but interrelated roles. Additive, not integrative. They also go on from there and say, actually, as well as multidisciplinary teams, the next step is really interdisciplinary teams. Now, we kind of stop at multidisciplinary teams a lot in our fields. So what does an interdisciplinary team look like? It's where you start to blur your discipline boundaries and teams integrate closer to complete a shared goal. So you start having people going, oh, okay, how do we blur those boundaries? And then even on from there, we have transdisciplinary teams. So this is where people really start to share, really start to become a more blended team, sharing objectives and core skills. Now, this might not be right for you, for your organisation to be completely transdisciplinary, but it's really probably useful to think about where are you with your team and how might you maybe move a little bit more to the right. I read this and I was like, I think my mind blew. I was like, oh wow, I've never thought about like what is on further than there. And then just as an individual, like how can you broaden your own skills so you could be a bit more generalist? There's a book called Squiggly Careers. There's a podcast that comes with it as well. And I think this is great. You know, recognise that we do have these squiggly careers. Most of us don't just start at one point and then end at the other point. We have these kind of crazy, brilliant careers. And that's great. It just makes life better. It makes everyone more rounded. It helps you appreciate other people's roles and learn outside your discipline. So just continue to learn about what other people do, you know, broaden your own understanding of your team and other disciplines and how that can help you solve and your team solve problems better. Thank you.